Hi, everybody. Welcome to English Digest. I'm Tom.
Hi, I'm Stephanie.
And today we're going to talk about martial arts. Martial arts include things like karate, judo, kung fu, stuff like that. But we've got kind of a special one here. It's a combination of martial arts and dancing, and it's from Brazil. Maybe you've heard of it. And this word, I guess, is from Portuguese, and it's pronounced capoeira.
Capoeira. You'll hear Americans often call it capoeira. Either way is cool. We're going to talk about it. It's kind of neat. If you haven't seen it before, get online and check it out. It's best to watch some video. But it is kind of cool. It combines, as Tom said, music, dance, and some martial arts moves. But it keeps you moving. And it's a great way to stay in shape if you are looking for a new type of exercise.
Yeah, I probably could not consider this myself for now because I have a bad knee.
Ooh, ow.
But if you're still kind of young and you've got a lot of energy and maybe traditional martial arts are a little boring for you and you want to have some fun and you can dance along to it. So yeah, capoeira might be something you could consider. So let's find out what this is all about in our unit on sports for the month of July. We'll now read the first part to you one time. The steady hypnotic pluck of a berimbau sounds up from the entrance to Vamos Studio in Taipei's Songshan district. Inside, 15 or so people clap along with the instrument, standing in a circle around two men wearing the all-white uniforms of capoeiristas. As the music plays, they begin a spectacular sequence of kicks, spins, and cartwheels. Capoeira is both the dance that's closest to a martial art and the martial art that is closest to a dance, explains instructor Ninja. Having practiced capoeira for over 18 years, Ninja was one of Taiwan's early adopters of capoeira. But the history of this elaborate form of dance fighting actually stretches back over 4 centuries to colonial Brazil and the Atlantic slave trade. No other country relied more heavily on slave labor than Brazil, whose economy was sustained by the up to 5.8 million Africans that were forcibly brought there to work on its plantations. Derived from African fighting traditions such as Ngolo, capoeira was conceived by slaves in Brazil to both protect themselves and preserve their heritage. At this time, the fighting style was outlawed by the Portuguese and had to be practiced in secret. Capoeira was disguised as a dance and accompanied by musical instruments and singing. To further protect themselves, capoeiristas would never reveal their identities to each other and instead use nicknames. Brazil finally abolished slavery in 1888, but it still would be almost 50 years before capoeira was made legal through the efforts of the activist Mestre Bimba. Bimba formalized the rules of capoeira and founded the first official capoeira style, Luta Regional Baiana, in 1932. His success encouraged capoeira to spread across Brazil and later the United States, Europe, and Japan. Capoeira became a symbol of Brazil around the world.
Okay, guys, let's look at the title first. Of course, this is a sports unit, so we've got capoeira, and it's described or defined here, after that colon, the Afro-Brazilian art of dance fighting. That's a good description, a dance fight. So Afro just means from Africa, and Brazilian, of course, is the adjective for the big country of Brazil, which is really, really big, actually. Now, let's take a look at the first sentence. We're kind of setting the scene here. Our writer is describing what could be a typical scene that you'd see if you were lucky enough to see this dance fighting. You've got a steady, hypnotic pluck of an instrument called a berimbau, and it sounds out from the entrance to Vamos Studio in Taipei's Songshan district. So this is actually a setting that you can find in Taipei in the Songshan district. If something's hypnotic, it's almost like somebody is hypnotizing you. You're just staring straight ahead and you can't move. You're just so caught up in whatever you're looking at. Now, pluck is something you do to a stringed instrument typically. If you play the violin, cello, bass, you know what I'm talking about. You pluck a string just using your finger. You don't need anything else. Or if you're a guitar player, they have those guitar picks. But you can pluck with your fingers. But if you use the guitar pick, you're picking the strings. It's not quite the same.
Exactly. Guitars are mostly plucked, whereas violins are mostly bowed with a bow, but you can pluck the strings from time to time.
It's called pizzicato.
It does happen occasionally.
Yes.
But yeah, you hear this berimbau, which is a traditional African percussion instrument, I believe. And so you can hear the pluck of the strings there. And of course, it's steady. It continues in a pattern, like steady rain, for example, falling all day. And of course, you hear this when you go to the Vamos studio in Taipei's Songshan district. Vamos in Espanol, in Spanish, means let's go, but I don't know what that means in Portuguese. It might be the same thing.
It's the same. They have a lot of shared words.
Okay, very good. So vamos means let's go. And of course, this studio is in the Songshan district of lovely, lovely Taipei. Now, inside, 15 or so people clap along with the instrument, clapping, 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 clapping with the instrument, and they're standing in a circle around two men wearing the all-white uniforms of someone who does capoeira, and they're called capoeiristas.
Ooh,
I hope I said that right.
You did. Good job. Yeah, it's not easy to say capoeiristas. Now, you guys know if you go to a certain coffee shop, it's a famous one, you know what I'm talking about. They'll call the people who work there baristas. Well, this is similar. We're just calling these people who work in this particular dance studio capoeiristas. It's similar. Now, as the music plays, they begin a spectacular sequence of kicks, spins, and cartwheels. Wow. Now, when you're talking about a sequence, it could be in many different fields or areas that you're talking about a sequence in. It could be science. Your DNA is actually a sequence if you look at it. Now, a sequence could also be a series of steps in a dance. What's the sequence? So it includes the order in which something happens. So a series, a sequence of something, a sequence of kicks or a sequence of, I don't know, punches. Maybe you're a boxer. You could talk about a sequence in that way too. So there's a particular order and pattern of kicks, spins, and cartwheels. Cartwheels are done with your whole body, and you use your hands and your feet, and you end up, going around in a circle. Little kids love cartwheels. I haven't done one for ages, but yeah, we've got some interesting moves in this dance fighting.
Exactly. So they might even do handsprings, who knows? But capoeira is both the dance that's closest to a martial art and the martial art that is closest to a dance. Explains instructor Ninja. So yeah, it's a martial art that's like a dance, or it's a dance that's like a martial art, basically, is what this person is saying. Now, let's move on to the next paragraph here. It says, having practiced capoeira for over 18 years, Ninja was one of Taiwan's early adopters of capoeira. Okay, so this basically says that Ninja has practiced capoeira for over 18 years. So, as a result of his experience, he was one of the first people in Taiwan to adopt capoeira to local audiences, I guess, or for the local market.
Kind of modify it, change it a little so that people here in Taiwan could enjoy it too. Yeah, if you've practiced something, it doesn't mean that, he doesn't know what he's doing. He has to still learn. If you are working in a particular field like medicine or law, or even accounting, he's a practicing accountant, he's a practicing attorney, he's a practicing physician. It just means that's their career, that's what they're working at, and they haven't retired yet. So he's been practicing this particular sport and dance for quite a while. So the history of this elaborate form of dance, elaborate just means kind of complicated. It's not simple to learn. It actually stretches back quite far. It goes back over 4 centuries. Remember, a century is 100 years. So over 400 years ago, that's a long time ago. And it goes back to an area in South America, colonial Brazil. And it's also linked to the Atlantic slave trade. Now, colonial refers to a country that invades another country and kind of sets up a small village or colony, as we call them. And they want to settle there from then on, right? But it isn't their original country. For example, a lot of people from England sailed over the Atlantic Ocean to America and settled there in America. Of course, the American Indians were already there, but the British wanted to set up their own colony. And that's how America became the USA that it is now.
Yeah, here in Taiwan, of course, you oftentimes hear about the Japanese colonial period.
True.
Between 1895 and 1945. And some remnants of the colonial period are still with us. Some of the original buildings are still standing.
Yeah.
Some Japanese shrines still exist in Taiwan here. So, yes, this particular martial art or the stance form has been in Brazil for over 400 years, and it has stretched back to colonial times during the Atlantic slave trade. When we talk about slaves, we often think about America, the American South, and stuff like that. But of course, slaves were brought not only to the United States, but to other countries in the Western Hemisphere, in the Caribbean Sea, and Brazil, and other places as well. So they had slaves there as well. In fact, they had them all the way until 1888.
There's still slave trade going on today, which is horrible to even say out loud, but it's true. So this sentence here, no other country relied more heavily on slave labor than Brazil. Of all the countries out there that were actually using some of these African slaves to help with their crops and farming, Brazil had by far the most slaves working in Brazil. And they have an economy that was sustained by the up to 5.8 million Africans that were forcibly brought there to work on its plantations. We're going to talk more about this. This particular sentence has a lot of our vocabulary words, so we're going to take a break now, listen to our Chinese teacher, and then we'll be back.
大家好，我是派老师。今天讲解的是7月份 Unit 5 也就是巴西战舞 The Afro-Brazilian Art of Dance Fighting。这个单元介绍的是 Capoeira 的起源以及特色。我们一起复习重要内容，学习关键句型、重点文法与单字片语吧。第一段先介绍 Capoeira 的伴奏音乐 Berimbau 贝林宝琴的乐声牵引出 Capoeira。舞者身穿全白衣服，舞蹈动作有踢腿、旋转、侧手翻。请看第一句 The steady, hypnotic pluck of a berimbau sounds out from the entrance to Vamo Studio in the Taipei Songshan District. 好，请同学特别把 sound out 画起来。这句话的意思，我们在讲解完 sound out 之后呢，再一起看。Sound out 这个动词片语是什么？发出声音，发出声音。好，所以这句话的意思是，从台北市松山区 Vamo Studio 的入口传来沉稳催眠般弹拨贝林宝琴的声音。好，请同学看到第三句 As the music plays, they begin a spectacular sequence of kicks, spins, and cartwheels. 好，这里呢，请同学看 a sequence of 画起来就是一连串的意思。最后一句 Capoeira is both the dance that's closest to a martial art and the martial art that is closest to a dance. 请同学把 close to 画起来，就是接近的意思。这整句话的意思是说，最接近武术的舞蹈，也是最接近武道的武术。第二段说明 Capoeira 的起源， 源于非洲的格斗传统，透过被强迫劳动的非洲奴隶而流传。请看第一句 Having practiced capoeira for over 18 years 这一句，请同学注意，这是一个分词构句。Having practiced 这边在意思上的组词其实就是教练 Ninja， 那他练舞已经练了超过18年了。好，再来请同学看到同一句的 Early adopters， 就是最早采纳的人。那我们知道比特币吧 Bitcoin， 我们也可以说 Early adopters of Bitcoin， 有一些人是比较早接受比特币来当作付款交易的货币。第二句 But the history of this elaborate form of dance， 请同学把 elaborate 画起来，就是细致繁复的意思。第三句 No other country relied more heavily 这一句，请同学看，没有哪个国家比巴西还要依赖奴隶劳动。这里的 no other than 这是一个特殊的句型，请同学特别注意，意思就是说巴西是最依赖奴隶的国家。
We're going to take a quick break. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay, let's continue talking about the history of capoeira. It is here in Taiwan. We have the master ninja here to thank for that. He has 18 years of experience in practicing capoeira, and he's responsible for adapting it to the local market here. And again, we're talking about the history of capoeira. It stretches back over 4 centuries to colonial Brazil.And it involves the Atlantic slave trade. Now, no other country relied more heavily on slave labor than Brazil, whose economy was sustained by the up to 5.8 million Africans that were forcibly brought there to work on its plantations.
Wow.
Okay, this is a long sentence with quite a bit of vocabulary. We begin with this pattern. No other country relied more heavily on slave labor than Brazil.Okay, so yeah, Brazil was the country that relied mostly on slave labor. So no other country relied on slave labor than Brazil. They relied on it very heavily, I guess even more heavily than the United States.
Oh, by far, yeah. Look at that number, 5.8 million. Now, if you're forcibly brought or someone is forcing you to do something, you know it's against that person's will.They have no freedom to make that decision. Someone is forcing them to do something. Forcibly, though, is an adverb, and it is being used to talk about how they were being brought over there. They weren't invited and promised a high salary if they come over to Brazil and work. No, they were chained up,forced to get on these ships and then moved over to Brazil. So they were forcibly brought there. And then they worked on plantations. A plantation is a word we usually associate with the American South. Just really big crops that are being used to grow different things like cotton, tobacco. Those were the crops in the early 1800s, in the U.S. at least.But a plantation also typically is associated with a huge mansion on there, and then they have their slave labor, although it is illegal there in Brazil currently to have slaves. Now, a plantation, I don't think I've seen any plantations in Taiwan, but it's a word typically, if you see it, guys, it's usually associated with slavery, but it doesn't have to be.Right,
it's just a really, really big farm, basically.
Huge.
But, yeah, when you see the word plantation, you think of the past and you think of slave labor. So derived from African fighting traditions such as Ngolo, capoeira was conceived by slaves in Brazil to both protect themselves and preserve their heritage. Now, as you know, Africa is a huge continent.
Yeah.
And so they probably have lots of different fighting traditions there. They have a long history of these various things. And one of their fighting traditions is Ngolo, but I'm sure there are several others. But this particular fighting tradition was conceived or thought up of or invented basically by slaves in Brazil to both protect themselves and preserve their heritage. So they had a reason for coming up with this particular fighting style. Yes, they did want to protect themselves, but they also wanted to continue their African heritage. They did not want to lose it, even though they were slaves.
Now, moving on to the next paragraph, it says at this time, the fighting style was outlawed by the Portuguese and had to be practiced in secret. Now, typically when I see Portuguese, I think of Portugal, the country. And if I talk about Brazil, I call the people that live there Brazilians. So Portuguese probably refers to the fact that they speak Portuguese, the language. Tom was asking me if vamos is the same in Portuguese as it is in Spanish. I just know that my brother, who lived there for a couple of years, he can talk to my little sister, who was in Argentina. She speaks Spanish, he speaks Portuguese, and they can still have a conversation, which I think is really interesting. So they have a lot of similarities, but they're not the same language. So the Portuguese outlawed this particular fighting style. If you outlaw something, it means your government, the people who have authority over that country or group or colony, they've decided you cannot do something, they ban it. So smoking is outlawed, of course, in restaurants now and different places. Outlaw kind of reminds me of the Old West in America, because we called those cowboys who had the guns and the horses, we called them outlaws if they were criminals. So when I see outlaw, it just kind of makes me laugh. It makes me think of, like the 1800s. So outlaw, again, just means to ban something that was once a law, or once something that was legal to do is no longer legal.
Yep, so it was outlawed by the Portuguese. Brazil was a colony of Portugal at one point, so they had to practice this particular fighting style in secret so they wouldn't get in trouble. And capoeira was disguised as a dance and accompanied by musical instruments and singing. So basically, the police would come, hey, you guys are practicing this fighting style. No, we're not. We're actually singing and dancing. So that was a way to be able to practice it in secret without getting in trouble. So it was disguised as a dance. It just was presented as a dance, even though it was more of a fighting style, although I'm sure they liked the music as well. And of course, it was accompanied by musical instruments and singing. So yeah, sometimes, of course, if you're singing, for example, in a concert, that's probably not enough, just you standing there singing. So maybe you need a piano to go along with you. The piano will accompany you.
To further protect themselves, these capoeiristas would never reveal their identities to each other. Instead, they use nicknames. Kind of makes me think of professional, what is it called? It's the great wide world of...
The World Wrestling
It's the wrestling, yes, sorry. That's kind of a show. It's fake. It's not real. And, of course, you have to have a cool nickname to fight in those. Moving on to the final paragraph, it said Brazil finally abolished or got rid of slavery in 1888. But it would be almost 50 years before capoeira was made legal through the efforts of the activist, and here's this guy's name, Mestre Bimba, or Bimba. Bimba formalized the rules of capoeira and founded the first official capoeira style. And Tom did this in Spanish or Portuguese. Luta. How did
Regional
you say?
Baiana.
Yeah.
But I was guessing there because I've only studied Spanish and not Portuguese.
So Luta Regional Baiana
Close
in 1932. So he can be thanked for this. If you're an activist in something, you're somebody that makes a lot of effort to publicize something, your position, and you do a lot of campaigning. You try to get people on your side to agree with you. That's an activist.
You could be a women's activist, for example, if you're politically involved for the advancement of women's rights and stuff like that. And his success encouraged capoeira to spread across Brazil, and then later it spread to the United States, to Europe, Europe and also to Japan and now to Taiwan. And capoeira became a symbol of Brazil around the world. That does sound true. Whenever I think of Brazil, I think of their music there. Is it samba? They're
samba,
so good at
yeah.
there. And then also this particular fighting style, capoeira.
Cool.
Which Brazil is known for along with other things. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to turn things over to our Chinese teacher.
第二段最后一句一样是分词构句 derived from African fighting traditions such as Gola. 好，这个 derived from 是分词构句，跟它后面这个主要子句主词在意思上是一样的，就是都是指 capoeira， 就是指 capoeira 是源自于非洲的格斗传统。那第三段提到有段时期 capoeira 必须在地下发展 The fighting style was outlawed by the Portuguese and had to be practiced in secret. 巴西呢受到葡萄牙殖民，有一段时间这种格斗的传统，葡萄牙人认定是非法的 It was outlawed. 第二句 Capoeira was disguised as a dance. 那就有人呢把这个 Capoeira 伪装成是一种舞蹈 and accompanied by musical instruments and singing. 这个 accompanied by 呢，那意思就是会用乐器还有歌唱来伴奏。第四段说明了 Capoeira 在 Mestre Bimba 宾巴大师努力之下，在巴西终于合法，也顺利传播到世界各地。Brazil finally abolished slavery in 1888. 请同学把 abolish slavery 画起来，就是废除奴隶制度。But it still would be almost 50 years before capoeira was made legal through the efforts of the activist Mestre Bimba. 请同学把 it still would be 还有 before 画起来。这是一个特殊的句型，整句话是在说，不过 capoeira 在将近50年后，透过倡导者宾巴大师的努力之下，才终于合法。那老师再给大家一个例句，我们用同样的句型来造句。It will be years before autonomous driving becomes widely accepted. Autonomous driving 那就是自驾车，车子呢自动驾驶。It will be years before autonomous driving becomes widely accepted. 还要好几年后，自驾才会受到普遍的接受。以上是我们针对 Unit 5第一天的讲解，谢谢大家。
That is it for today, but we're going to continue talking about capoeira in our next program. There's a lot to say about it, and we have a lot of things to teach you, so please join us then. From all of us here at English Digest, I'm Tom.
I'm Stephanie.
Goodbye.
Bye.